All right, welcome. Today we're cackling a really big one. We're breaking down a sermon that gets right into a question a lot of people struggle with. In a world that's all about being inclusive, how can any one religion claim to be the only way to God? Yeah, it's a huge point of tension. So let's just dive right in and see how this sermon unpacks it.
And boom, there it is, the big question. I mean, you've probably heard this before, right? Maybe you've even asked it yourself. In our world where we have endless options for pretty much everything, this idea of one single exclusive path, it can feel, pretty narrow-minded. This is the exact challenge the sermon is trying to take on.
And this right here, this is the sermon's answer, its core idea that tries to solve that puzzle. The way is narrow, but the welcome is wide. It kind of sounds like a contradiction, doesn't it? A narrow way, but a wide welcome? The rest of this breakdown is all about unpacking what exactly that means, based on the arguments in the sermon.
Okay, so the first argument just completely flips the script on this. Instead of trying to defend exclusivity as some kind of necessary rule, the sermon presents it as, well, an act of mercy. Let's take a look at how they do that.
So this is the crucial shift in thinking. On the one hand, you have the common view. A single path feels like a wall, right? Something designed to keep people out. But the sermon wants you to see it from the other side. It's not a restriction, it's a rescue. Think about it this way. If you're drowning, you're not going to complain that only one lifeguard is swimming out to save you, right? No way. You're just grateful for the rescue.
And this analogy really drives the point home. Imagine there's a deadly disease, but there's only one proven cure. Is it narrow-minded for a doctor to insist on that one cure? Or is it actually an act of mercy to give you the only thing that's going to work? According to this argument, ignoring the one cure isn't being open-minded, it's just being reckless.
This quote really gets to the philosophical heart of it all. The sermon makes a big distinction between the nature of truth and the nature of love. I mean, think about it. Truth, by its very nature, is exclusive. 2 + 2 is 4. It's not 5, it's not 6. But the offer of that truth, the sermon argues, comes from a place of inclusive love that's for everyone.
Okay, so that leads to the next big question, right? If there's only one way, what about all the people who have never even heard of it? This is a tough one, and the sermon tackles it head-on by making an argument about divine justice and a kind of universal moral compass. Let's see how this argument is built.
So pulling from the book of Romans in the Bible, the sermon lays out this three-part framework. It's their argument for how every single person has at least some knowledge of a moral standard. First, you've got creation itself, the natural world around us. Second, there's our own conscience, that little voice inside. And third, and this one's interesting, it's the very act of judging other people. When we do that, we're showing that we ourselves know the difference between right and wrong.
And this leads to a pretty fascinating conclusion in the sermon. They use this example. Imagine a man in some remote tribe who's never heard the Christian message. But he knows it's wrong to beat your wife. He even tells other people that. Now, if that same man turns around and beats his own wife, well, the sermon argues he's basically condemned himself by breaking the moral law he already knew was true.
All right. The next part of the sermon takes a sharp turn from theology right into the world of statistics. The argument here is that the way ancient prophecies were fulfilled in the life of Jesus is so statistically mind-boggling that it can't be a coincidence. It has to point to a divine plan.
And to build this case, the sermon points to these really specific prophecies that were written hundreds of years before Jesus was even born. We're talking about incredible details, like the exact town he'd be born in, the precise price of his betrayal, how he'd stay silent in front of his accusers, and even the bizarre act of soldiers gambling for his clothes.
And here is the absolute climax of that argument. So some mathematicians actually calculated the odds of just 8 of these prophecies being fulfilled by one person, just by chance. The number they came up with is 1 in 100 quadrillion. That's a 1 with 17 zeros after it. It's a number so huge, it's almost impossible to even wrap your head around. So how do you even begin to visualize a number that big? The sermon uses this really powerful analogy. Picture this. You cover the entire state of Texas with silver dollars 2 feet deep. Now you take just one of those millions and millions of coins, mark it with an X, and just toss it in somewhere randomly. The odds of a blindfolded person reaching in and pulling out that one specific coin on their very first try? Yep, that's 1 in 100 quadrillion.
And this all leads to the sermon's main point for this whole section. The argument is that this level of improbability, it's just beyond the realm of random chance. It points toward what they call undeniable design, a purposeful divine plan.
Okay, now we get to the final and maybe the most important metaphor in the whole sermon. It's meant to tie all of these different arguments together into one single, powerful image, the idea of a bridge.
So first, the sermon sets up the problem. It paints this picture of a great chasm, a massive, deep divide that separates humanity from a holy God. And what caused this separation? The sermon argues it's human sin and our own imperfection.
Well, naturally, people try to build their own bridges to get across this chasm. The sermon lists the usual attempts, trying to be a good person, following all the religious rules, or just putting in a lot of moral effort. But according to this logic, every single one of these human-built bridges is just too short. They all collapse and fail to make it across the gap.
And this brings us to the sermon's big answer. The argument is that since we couldn't build a bridge to God, God built a bridge to us. And that one perfect bridge is the cross. So in this view, the cross isn't some wall to keep people out. It's the bridge God built to bring everyone home. This quote really brings the whole argument back to our own response. The sermon suggests that maybe the real problem isn't about God being unfair. Maybe it's about our own pride, our unwillingness to admit that we can't build the bridge ourselves and that we actually need the rescue He's offering.
And this takes us right back to where we started. The sermon concludes that providing one perfect divine solution, well, that's not narrow-mindedness. It gets reframed with this powerful phrase, laser-focused love. It's this idea of a love so intense and so specific that it provides the one way that will actually work.
And finally, we land on this dynamic between God's action and our freedom. The sermon puts it really simply, God loves and people choose. God acts in love to provide the bridge. But true love, it argues, never forces itself on anyone. It always leaves room for a choice. God provides the way, but every person still has to choose for themselves whether or not to cross.
And so that leaves us with the central question. But now it's been reframed by all these arguments from the sermon. Is the idea of a single path to God an exclusive wall built to keep people out? Or is it, as this sermon powerfully argues, an inclusive rescue plan? With a narrow way, for sure, but a welcome that is wide open to absolutely everyone.